Hi, this is Scott Miller. Welcome to my top performance blog. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with Tor Travis. Tor, tell us a little bit about yourself.
I am a clinical social worker in Santa Fe, New Mexico. I do telehealth and I've been doing FIT or at least recording my data for about 2.5 years.
Perfect. It makes you a prime candidate to start doing deliberate practice, which is really how we first came into contact. And in the times that we've spent together talking and me watching your journey, I've found that, well, I think like many people, your experience is really unique, but I also thought that there were a number of things you discovered along the way that might be helpful to others who start this journey. So I'd asked if you would be willing to talk to me about it, and you said, absolutely.
That's right.
Perfect. So where did this whole thing about deliberate practice, how did you connect with that? What was your first contact with it?
I found out about it through your blog, and I found out about you from Eric Gentry, who is somebody out at the Arizona Trauma Institute, and I was doing a 3 or 4 day training with them, and he said, well, there is this one way of increasing your outcomes, and it's not through these different forms of therapy. And it's really hard to do. In fact, it's so hard to do that I abandoned it several times. And I thought, oh, that sounds right up my alley. It's sort of this like anti-establishment, really difficult process that might actually work. And so I got really interested. And then I came across your blog, and you talked a lot about deliberate practice. So I got Erickson's book, Peak, and I read Peak. And after that, I got into the drip course that you and Daryl Chow are running on deliberate practice and read Better Results. And I got pretty quickly hooked into the whole idea of this sort of cycle of excellence. And I think the thing that really attracted me the most about it was how democratic it felt. That it wasn't a matter of your level of education. It wasn't a matter of brilliance and intelligence, right? Ericsson finds that chess grandmasters and Go grandmasters or whatever are average intelligence. So it was really a matter of committing to this process, and anybody could do it. And I thought, that sounds great, because I would like to be above average, but I am average. So maybe if I do this thing, I'll be an above average therapist eventually. And so that appealed to me.
Yeah. Wow. And so you got the book, you read Ericsson's book, Peak, which I'm sure you'd highly recommend. It does give you a pretty thorough grounding in the idea of deliberate practice outside of the field of therapy. Then you read Better Results. Thanks very much for doing that. And you started gathering data, etc. And then you reached out for a consult just to chat with me. Why?
So there actually is a crucial step in between here, which was that once I got into the deliberate practice field or sort of arena, I realized that expert coaching was necessary, but that the therapeutic field didn't have a way of evaluating who was an expert. Because if your level of education doesn't matter, and your years of clinical practice don't matter, and the total accumulated supervised hours you've done don't matter, then what does matter? And I think that's still a big question mark that I have, that there isn't a sort of proliferation of therapeutic experts that you can go and seek help from. So what I did was I reached out on a forum that existed at the time to FIT people and just said, hey, who can help me? And somebody said, you should really contact Ricky Addis out in California. So I talked to her, and I think if it hadn't been for her, I wouldn't still be doing this, because she basically just volunteered her time. She said, I'm interested in learning how to train people in this stuff, and if you'll be my guinea pig, we can work together. So we worked together for 2 years, and we were meeting pretty regularly, and she basically helped me implement FIT. So I had a lot of ideas from what I'd read about what it was and how it worked. And she was able to say, yeah, that's true, but not quite so much over here. And here's some of your misunderstanding. And most specifically, she helped me really get my administration of the ORS and SRS refined and effective. So for example, she encouraged me and facilitated the process of creating what I call like a FIT pitch, an actual way of communicating what FIT is effectively, succinctly, and hopefully in an entertaining way.
Mm.
So we worked a lot on how can I get my little fit elevator pitch down?
Mm.
And then how can I stay consistent about my administration? Because things would kind of slack off. Oh, I wouldn't do the SRS anymore. And so she helped me really stay on that and make that a very consistent thing. So the first, before I ever reached out for deliberate practice help from you, I knew that I needed a certain amount of data, or at least that's what I believed at the time, before I could actually have a behavior specific deliberate practice loop, right? Where there is something that I'm actually being held accountable for. So I don't know how well I'm doing. What am I accountable for? So
Right.
I first spent 2 years just getting data, getting enough data that I actually could come to somebody. And because there is this proliferation of fit people, and it's only these experts, and experts can charge however much they want, it's not a cheap venture. So I don't want to go in and waste my time and have you tell me, yeah, that'll be this much money, go back and get more data. I want to go in and say, I've done the data, I've done the homework, I've done all this stuff, I prepared for the stuff, I did a TDPA. What do I do? Like, I've got 25 minutes. What do I do? And get in and get out.
Right.
And so it wasn't until I felt like I was actually going to get my money's worth from you that I contacted you, because it's actually not that easy to get good feedback for therapy. So those were all of the conditions.
Wow.
If that's helpful.
It's very helpful. And to give the people that are listening in sort of sense of the timeline, because now you've mentioned it took 2 years to really get a reliable data set that you could count on and from which you and I could chat and start to sort and look for patterns, anything that might be holding you back, anything we might exploit for better results, etc. How long in total from first hearing to that point where you pick up the phone? What would you say?
3 years.
So 3 years, you've read the books, you've learned to administer the measures in order to get reliable data, and then
I pick up the phone, I have a data set, I have anticipated questions that you will ask me based on my knowledge of deliberate practice. I have identified areas using the TDPA of growth or weakness, I should say, for myself. And then I contact you, and my whole plan for what I'm going to say gets thrown out the window because I just get so excited talking about my process. I'm like, damn it. And then you we just sort of jam for a while. And then at some point we say, okay, here's what we're going to do. Tor, you're going to map out your session. You're going to work on these 3 specific items. Particularly, the first assignment was to work on finishing my sessions on time. So we had a measurable goal, like a SMART goal, essentially. Okay, finish sessions on time. And then we had a hypothesis as to how we were going to get there, or at least this is what I had, which was, well, I'm going to map out my sessions in this decision tree. And as I map out my sessions, I'll be able to know where I'm at in a session and regulate things accordingly, and then finish on time. So then I run the experiment. Basically, it becomes an experiment. And for the next month, I'm running this experiment, which is there a relationship between the degree to which I follow this decision tree and whether or not I end sessions on time? And it turns out that mapping my sessions may not be the appropriate intervention. So I took a step back from that, and I said, okay, well, is there some other variable here? Is there some other thing that's making a session good for clients or not?
And can I interrupt you there and ask you a question
Totally.
about that?
Yeah.
Because again, you were doing this on your own. I did the easy thing after we looked at your data, gave you an assignment, and you went off and did it. And I just want to testify at the detail you created. You had these beautiful flow charts, not just one, but a couple flow charts, etc. In the process, you discover that the answer doesn't lie in this map, but you put in all this work. Why didn't you give up?
I've thought a lot about this question, and for all the audience out there, because the assumption is that I'm going to say something useful, I don't think I have any useful information for you because I don't know why I don't give up. And there are a lot of different things. One of them is that I have built my whole therapeutic conditions around doing deliberate practice. So when I started doing FIT, I realized that agency environments were not conducive to doing FIT. And so because FIT was my priority, because getting good outcomes was my priority, I decided not to work in agencies. So I don't have to worry about attending staff meetings. I don't have to worry about water cooler talk and gossip and any of that stuff. I get to really focus on this process. So part of my identity as a therapist is being a FIT therapist. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
That's a primary part of my work. So I always am returning back to, okay, what are my outcomes? Okay, what are my outcomes? Okay, what are my outcomes? And I realized in the first part of the process that this is a long one. If I improve my outcomes now, let's say I do become a better therapist right now. I won't know if my clients had a significantly improved experience until they get discharged. And I don't know when that's going to be. Maybe it's in a month, maybe it's in 2 months, maybe it's in a year. So there's always going to be this lag between whatever intervention I'm doing for deliberate practice and actually the fruits from that intervention. And so within that lag time, there's room for experimentation. There's room to continue to try new options. And that's the bottom line for me.
You started off by saying you're not sure if you had any answers. And to me, you gave several really remarkable answers that sort of line up one-to-one with the research literature. You didn't leave it to chance. Your structure facilitates deliberate practice. Number two, deliberate practice and FIT outcomes are part of your clinical identity. We know from research that therapists who place a heavy emphasis on the healing involvement with a client, the mishmash of the work, tend to have higher burnout rates and poor outcomes than therapists who place their identity or organize their work around the outcome of the work. And the third piece you mentioned that fits squarely with the research on deliberate practice is playful experimentation. So you know, and you're patient in the process because you know it's a long time between implementing a deliberate practice plan and the results. So I've got to have fun. I've got to experiment. I've got to be true to myself.
Yeah. And I think if there's one other part of this, it's breaking down the larger goal, let's say, of an outcome to a specific, smaller measurable goal. So for example, the bottom line, let's say, is outcomes. But to get there, the theory is we can address particular behaviors that contribute to outcomes. Okay, well, how do we make those measurable? And then that becomes the only thing that I'm focused on. If it doesn't work, then I'm going to change the process while keeping my eye on that prize, if that makes sense. And then secondly, I'm paying as much attention to my failures as I am to my success. Maybe even more so. So I put in an intervention on Monday, and I run the experiment all week for my 20 clients, and I just record, did it work or did it fail? And I don't actually change anything for that week, if that makes sense. So for example, this week, to improve engagement, I'm working on always putting my Zoom clients on full screen. Okay, great. That's this week's experiment. And I'm sort of recording, did it work? And if it doesn't work, then I've learned something. It's like that Fermi quote. The hypothesis is correct, you learn something. It's incorrect, you learn something. So there's always this learning happening, as long as I'm intentional about what I'm doing. So it's not, I guess I'd put it this way, it's not discouraging to get it wrong.
So you had this elaborate map or maps that you developed. As I say, I was really impressed. And then you discover that you're wrong, that the answer lies someplace else. And what was it for you?
Yeah. So I realized that my mood had as much of an influence on whether or not I finished sessions on time as whether or not I tracked on my map. And when I then further looked into the relationship between mood and the map, I realized there was an underlying characteristic, which was engagement. if I'm in a good mood, then I'm naturally engaged in the process. If I'm in a bad mood, then I'm not engaged in the process. So now my interventions are more a matter of regulating engagement, sometimes through content and sometimes through context. So right now I'm standing up because it's 1 PM and I get really sleepy at 1 PM. So I'm standing up and I'm recording. I have now on this new chart on engagement, whether or not I'm actually capable of producing greater engagement from these proposed interventions based on whether or not they work and whether or not I'm actually able to do them. So I have, for example, on my map, make a cup of tea. This is 2 weeks ago. I have not made a single cup of tea. Why? Because making a cup of tea means that I have to go into another room and do all this work. But putting somebody on full screen requires no time at all. So now I have these new interventions that I'm toying with.
So the homework assignment is make this map out all your work. While you're busy doing that, something else occurs to you. First off, the map doesn't really predict whether or not.
Well, that's the problem. It doesn't work.
It didn't work.
That was what happened. It didn't work. So then it was time to abandon it or improve upon it. That was it.
Then there's a side step. The side step is, whoa, wait a minute. It has to do with my mood, or a lot with my mood. And connected to that is this underlying process of whether or not you're really engaged. And now you're exploring very specific actions and tasks, experimenting, to use your word, to see which ones do keep me engaged and at particular times.
Correct.
As I listen to you talk, making a cup of tea, expanding the Zoom screen, this is not anything I've ever read in a book called How to Do Psychotherapy 101. It seems in a way tangential. So how do you put that together? You're actually doing more effective therapy by discovering that going 50 paces to make yourself a cup of tea is not as effective as standing up at 1 PM. What does this have to do with therapy?
So, well, let's just slow that down for a second, because we don't know if I'm a more effective therapist at this point. What I am better at now is increasing my engagement with a client. Whether or not they will have measurable effects on my outcomes is yet to be determined. But one thing, to answer your question, a big epiphany I had was that I am a crucial part of effective therapy, that managing Tor is a vital skill in ensuring that clients feel a therapeutic alliance. And if Tor is not managed well, the sessions won't go well. So I have to learn my limitations. That was a really big part, was realizing I can't just show up because I'm not an app, I'm a human. Okay, well then how do I work with the biology and neurology of Tor and how he works? And what are his limitations? What can I reasonably ask of him? Can I really reasonably ask him to make a cup of tea? No, he's just not that kind of person. But he's willing to stand up during a session as long as the clients are okay with it. Okay, well, let's see if we can ask him to do that during sessions, because if he's doing okay or better, if he's more engaged in clients, report having a better session. Wow. Does that make sense?
It makes absolute sense. And from the literature on psychotherapy, you're attending to what Saul Garfield said back in the 80s was the neglected variable in psychotherapy outcome research, which is the therapist. And deliberate practice really brings the therapist into focus. Tor, I really appreciate your being willing to share where you're at in the journey and where you've come from so far. I hope we can check in again in the future.
Great to be with you, Scott.
Thanks.